U.S. citizenship. Should I renounce it or should I not renounce it? How do I make that very important decision? Exit tax considerations, U.S. access, will I be able to travel back to the U.S., economic opportunities, global banking, everything you need to know in order to understand whether or not U.S. citizenship is indeed for you an asset or a liability. Everything in this video. Hello, my name is Javier Correa, and I'm a licensed enrolled agent, fully admitted to practice before the Internal Revenue Service, and I'm also the tax director here at the Rothbard Group, where we focus on cross-border international tax for American citizens and also for global entrepreneurs and investors who are not American. But today, I'm talking to my American clients all over the world. One of the main issues that Americans face when they're operating internationally is citizenship-based taxation. You know, Americans have this unique thing, which is that as long as they're citizens of the US, they are tax residents of the United States of America. And that, in of itself means that the US citizen, even though he's living abroad, is still fully subject to US taxation. You still have to file that 1040 every year. You're fully subject to FATCA, and you have to, report your foreign accounts on the FBAR, and you have to essentially operate as if you were in the US, even though you have an international lifestyle and an international business. I've worked with clients that haven't been back to the US in 10 plus years, and they're still considered tax residents of the US. So there is no escaping unless you actually renounce your US citizenship. I think the first thing I would tell everyone or anyone considering renunciation is, first of all, don't renounce just because it's a trend. So a lot of people on YouTube say, hey, I renounced my US citizenship and now I have a Turkish or a St. Lucian passport and I'm super happy. And in reality, when you see them in private, they absolutely regret their decision. So I think it's something that you have to analyze from your very own personal facts and circumstances, and not something that you should let anyone on YouTube or anyone in general, for that matter, push you into. Now, here is my take as a licensed U.S. tax practitioner on whether or not you should renounce U.S. citizenship. I'm going to give you the facts so that you can objectively make a decision based on verifiable facts. So, number one is from a tax perspective. So obviously, if you renounce U.S. citizenship, you will no longer be considered a U.S. person for tax purposes. You will become a non-resident alien for U.S. tax purposes. And that means that, yes, from a tax perspective, your life is going to be easier, right? If you're a non-resident alien for U.S. tax purposes, living, for example, in the Republic of Panama, you can now take full advantage of the Panamanian territorial tax system without the U.S. coming in through the back door and essentially taxing everything Panama left untaxed. So you will most likely see, especially if you move to a low tax or tax-friendly country, you will likely see your overall tax exposure diminish. You will see your overall tax bill minimized. And for an entrepreneur or investor, that may sound like a dream. So essentially, dividend income will be tax-free on the US side. And if you live in Panama, it will likely be tax-free on the Panamanian side as well if you plan your structure correctly. Interest income, capital gains, even on US stocks, for the most part, will be tax-free because NRAs are not taxed on capital gains, even when the stocks are located in the United States, barring a handful of exceptional circumstances. And so in general, you're going to have a better tax treatment. Even, for example, if you want to have a US LLC after you renounce US citizenship, you're going to get much better tax treatment through those US LLCs than you would as an American citizen. So I would say if you look at it purely from a tax perspective, there is a mathematical argument that would indicate that yes, it would make sense to renounce US citizenship. However, you also have to take into consideration that before you get to that point where you're a non-resident alien and essentially you're very happy living your tax-free life, there is a huge barrier in the middle, which is the U.S. exit tax. A lot of people don't know and don't realize that when you renounce U.S. citizenship, you can trigger a major all-in deemed disposition tax on your worldwide assets, which essentially means that the IRS will consider that you've sold all your assets at the moment of renunciation at the same time, and you need to come up with a liquidity to pay that tax. Now, there are some deferral mechanisms, but it comes at a very large expense. So essentially, that exit tax can be triggered if your net worth is over $2 million. So that is the number one thing that everyone says on YouTube, right? If your net worth is not over $2 million, but at $2 million or more, a little correction there, then you trigger the exit tax. So that's the one everyone fixates on. But then you can also trigger the exit tax if your overall tax burden on average for the past 5 years reaches a certain threshold. Last I checked, it was a little over $200,000. So even if your overall net worth is reduced because you gift your assets or something like that, or you put them in a well-structured trust or something like that, you can still have a situation where you trigger the exit tax because your income has been too high over the past couple of years. So that's also something to consider. Not many people talk about that. And then the other one is obviously you have to be compliant. So if you can't prove that you have been compliant with your taxes for the past 5 years, then it's also the same thing. If you're not compliant, then you will trigger the exit tax. So some of you may not trigger the exit tax, most of you will, and that is something you definitely have to take into consideration. Now, a lot of people say, well, Javier, isn't there any exceptional case where I may not be subject to the exit tax? And there is only one that I think is worth mentioning, which is the dual national exception. So for some of you who have been American and let's say Canadian from birth, or American and Irish from birth, or Mexican American from birth, then there are certain circumstances where you could renounce U.S. citizenship without triggering the exit tax, regardless of your net worth, regardless of your income level. But you have to talk to a professional to make sure you qualify, because just being a dual citizen or a dual national is not enough. You need to meet other criteria, but it's good that you're aware, and I want to put that on your radar. Now, once you renounce that U.S. citizenship, how is your life going to change? Once you renounce U.S. citizenship, number one, the major question that you have to answer is, do I want to travel back to the United States? I think that is a major question that everyone that is considering renunciation has to answer. And so think about it this way. Traveling to the US is one of the most challenging things that exists within the world of international mobility. Practically every country on earth needs to essentially get a visa to be able to travel to the United States. So for example, if you are a Mexican, if you're Venezuelan, if you are Chinese, if you are Panamanian, you need to get a B1, B2 visa in order to travel to the US. That means going to the consulate, getting an appointment. You're not going to get that from one day to the next. It means proving that you have non-immigrant intent, which can be very challenging for a former citizen. And so getting the visa is not guaranteed. Now, that brings me to another element. Even if you have one of the passports that is part of the visa waiver program, so for example, most European Union passports are in that program, which means that you can file a form online and essentially get a visa waiver. There are some exceptions if you've been to Cuba or Iran, but in the vast majority of cases, an Irish citizen or French citizen would be able to travel to the United States without formally getting a visa, just applying for ESTA. And then you have, for example, the exceptional case of Canadians and Bermudans who can travel to the US without even needing to request a visa waiver. Now, even if you are in one of those circumstances where you hold one of these, special passports that overall would not number over 45, you still can be denied admission into the United States because under the Immigration and Nationalities Act, if you renounce U.S. citizenship for tax avoidance purposes, right, then you can be deemed inadmissible to the United States regardless of the passport that you hold. So when you're renouncing U.S. citizenship, if you want to renounce, in addition to the tax planning that is involved, you also want to make sure that you've planned out an explanation as to why you're renouncing, and you have to make sure that you are motivating your renunciation for things other than tax. Now, I'm not encouraging anyone to lie, but the important thing is that you really put other arguments at the forefront of the reasons why you are renouncing U.S. citizenship, right? Anything that isn't taxes. So essentially, can you bank in the U.S. as a non-resident alien? Yeah, 100%. It won't be as easy as opening a bank account when you were a citizen, but yes, it is possible to open bank accounts in the U.S., particularly in big cities like Miami or Houston, even as a non-resident alien. Now, we're seeing the Treasury Department pushing banks potentially to collect information on who's a citizen and who's not a citizen when they open an account, but thus far we have seen nothing to indicate that non-U.S. citizens would be barred from opening accounts altogether. So definitely a banking link can be preserved. You can still open brokerage accounts. You can still open American companies. You can still invest in U.S. stocks. You can still invest in U.S. real estate. The U.S. is still, I would say, quite open to international investing. The one element that I think I would flag as becoming significantly harder when you're a non-citizen is looking for a job. Now, I mostly work with entrepreneurs and investors, and they'll say, Javier, I really don't care. I have my own business. I'm self-employed or whatever. But I also work with some top-level executives, right, at Fortune 500 companies who make very good money, but as employees. And when you're no longer a U.S. citizen, even though there is no formal ban on an American company essentially hiring a non-resident alien as an employee, provided that their work duties are performed outside the United States, so it would have to be a remote worker. Even though there is no ban, I will say that in practice, I have seen most top-tier American companies simply say, if you're not a citizen, we can't hire you, right? Because they want to work with American citizens. This is what they know. It is what they're programmed to think. So I would say that take into consideration that the US has the world's most dynamic labor market. In fact, I always say that for people who want high wages, probably the US and Switzerland are the best countries on earth, and your US citizenship, in fact, in that case, can become a true asset because it'll be much easier for a top-paying company like JP Morgan or Amazon or Google or Meta to hire an American than it would be to hire a non-resident alien. So again, things to consider. Now, in addition to that, if you're, fascinated by politics, obviously you have to take into consideration that you will lose your right to vote in US elections. I think that is obviously a given. And then the other thing that you have to understand is that this is an irreversible decision. Once you renounce US citizenship, barring maybe getting a green card and then going again through a naturalization process, you are not getting that citizenship back. It's not like you can say, oh, I actually, I repent. I'm sorry. I regret it. Can I please have my US passport back? Can I please have my US citizenship back? It's not the way it works. In addition to that, because your passport will probably list you as born in the United States, you have to realize that now you have to provide additional explanations to banks around the world. So you will be able to open bank accounts more easily in one regard, which is that you are no longer a US person, which requires more compliance, more efforts, higher minimum deposits, and so forth. But when banks see, born in the United States, they're going to automatically think that you are a US person. They are trained by FATCA to consider place of birth in the US as a risk factor for US person status. So you're going to have to show all the banks your certificate of loss of nationality issued by the US State Department. However, once that is done, effectively your available menu of banks is actually going to be more ample. So essentially, US citizenship, asset or liability? I think that's a question each one of you have to answer at home. I don't believe renunciation is the answer for everyone, but if you decide to renounce or if you don't decide to renounce, you need to understand the exact consequences of your decision, and you need to understand and have the best tax advice available to you regardless of whatever choice you make. So if you want to have a further and deeper discussion regarding this, we welcome it, and we welcome the opportunity to work with you. Rothbardgroup.com. And see you in the next one.